Okay, well, hello everybody. How's everybody doing today? As you can see, I'm a little bit more laid back and relaxed today. It's Saturday morning, about lunchtime. I just wanted to put up the second video for this week on chapter 4, which is the career development theories. Now, there are two different slideshows, PowerPoint slideshows in Blackboard. So once you log into Blackboard, and if you go down the left-hand side, click PowerPoint slides, there's two of them. One is from one of a doctoral student that worked for me, Mark. He did a really nice job on it. The second one is one that I put together from the textbook that's a little bit more just plain slides. But you have two different slideshows to go through the theories. Now, of course, our discussion question for this week is you selecting a theory and applying it. Um, so let's just talk about chapter 4. It's a long chapter. The other ones are pretty brief, so this one's a good one to jump in. Um, and some things you want to ask about, like the theories. You want to understand how does it describe the phenomenon that we're looking at. And for our purposes, it'd be like career development, a person trying to do some research on what careers may or may not be available or appropriate or a good fit for them. That's kind of where our evaluation would come into play. How are some different variables like race, disability, gender, age? How do these things affect the goodness of fit, if you will, of the occupation for the individual? How's the process? How's it described? Um, are there different factors involved? Um, to me, I always like to look at, how well is it able to predict the future when I'm working with clients? Does it have empirical support? Meaning, are there studies that show that when you utilize the theory and apply it appropriately, is it able to have some essentially quantitative data showing that we helped the person go from point A to point B? And also, how does it discuss the career development? Now, Frank Parsons, going back to 1909, his book was published after he passed away. He was from the Boston Vocation Bureau. He basically proposed a three-step process. It's what's called a trait and factor approach. One, gaining information about the person. So we're doing the testing, we're doing our clinical interview, we're getting to know their strengths, their weaknesses, their intelligence, their personality, their values, their morals, perhaps their sexual orientation, religious variables. I mean, there's so many different things that come into who the person is. Next thing, let's gain information about the work environment or where they're going to theoretically go enter into. And then we kind of match up these two. So who's the person, who's the environment, and let's match them up. It's similar in a way to a theory called John Holland's theory of congruence that we'll get to in a little bit. But the main thing about Frank Parsons is this was a one-shot deal. Back in the 18th and 19th and early 20th centuries, when a person selected an occupation, that's what they did for the rest of their life. Like my grandpa Brady, he went to World War II, he went to Villanova, became an engineer, fought in the Pacific, came back, worked for Westinghouse as an engineer, had the same job his whole employer, his whole life, retired and died. And basically, within a 2 or 3 mile triangle where he lived, where he worked, where he was buried, that's Western Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh. That's kind of where I came from. But that doesn't work anymore because now a person doesn't get a job and stay with that employer for 40 years. It's just a different labor market. Thus, Frank Parsons' theory doesn't really fit what our environment is today. Now, Super is another giant in the field. He had the lifespan, life space theory. The textbook does a great job of going through it, so I'll leave that up to you. He really started publishing this in the early 50s, 53, 57, 69. He had 14 basic assumptions. Number one, people are different in their abilities, personality, needs, values, interests, traits, self concepts, and so on. People are kind of made up of these different variables, if you will. And each occupation requires a specific set of variables. For example, a used car salesman is different than a police detective and is different than a genetic researcher, and so on. Some of the other assumptions in Super's theory is that vocational preferences and competencies are changeable. They change over time. So when you're 16, it might be different than when you're 34, and it might be different when you're 54. And really, this pattern of your social development, there's some variables that interplay, like the parents' socioeconomic status, of course, your intelligence, your mental ability, your education, your skills, your personality, how mature you are, and so on. What he predicts is that success will be a relationship between which stage the person is in and how the fit between their personality and their work environment. Career maturity is basically when you have set in your ways, so like when you may be in your 40s and 50s and you kind of know who you are and what kind of work you want to do. It's a developmental theory that goes through the stages. You can read about the textbook, so I don't need to go through it too much in depth. It's a great theory, though. I would highly recommend taking a look at it. Now, with his lifespan, there's a couple different areas that we should speak about. You start with growth. That's when you're a little kid. You want to, like for me, I wanted to be a professional baseball player. You have these fantasies. You don't really understand the relationship between your capacity and what the occupation takes. Exploration, maybe I'm in my teenage years, I'm starting to get my first jobs, I'm starting to explore what jobs might fit me and what jobs I don't like. Establishment, okay, I graduated college, I'm working in my career that I've chosen, I'm starting to establish my career. Maintenance, think of a bell-shaped curve. Now I'm like in my 40s and 50s, I'm trying to keep my skills, I'll probably be updating my skills so I'm not outdated and downsized. And then at the end, disengagement. I'm getting older. I'm getting ready to retire. I'm wrapping up my work life. Um, you know, think about the life structure. That's one of the key things about Super's theory. And acknowledge that people are going to be at different places. Just because you're 50 doesn't mean you're in, the maturity phase, or you could be basically exploring. Maybe you're a beach bum and you just never really got into it. Now, there's different roles that we play. Like, first, you're going to be a son or a daughter, then a student. Then you're going to be maybe a boyfriend, a girlfriend, and then a college student, hopefully a worker. Down the line, you might become a spouse or a partner, and maybe become a homemaker or a parent or a pensioner, retiree. Basically, the theory says different theaters that they can be: home, school, work, community, and so on. Your self-concept is basically who you think you are based upon all these different things. And again, it's a developmental theory, so over time it keeps changing and growing and building. There's the C-DAC model that you can take a look at. For me, I use the self-directed search a lot. If you look in that report that I sent out, the self-directed search is one of the instruments I use probably 4,000 or 5,000 times. But there's different ones like the career development inventory, value scale, salience inventory, and so on. There's the exploration and the extrapolation model you could take a look at. It's the 3 steps that are outlined in the PowerPoints. Now let's get to John Holland. Now I use John Holland a lot, and I guess I should put my bias and prejudice on the table. For my dissertation at the University of Maryland for my PhD, I used John Holland's theory of congruence to essentially, I think last lecture I talked about the longitudinal work I'm doing with Maryland Division of Rehabilitation Services. I used Holland's theory as my basis for my doctoral dissertation. There's 6 essential personality types, and they also have corresponding work environment types: realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, conventional. And again, they have the exact same type of environments. And what Holland basically stipulates is that he feels that people are kind of born in these personality types, grow over time, but they will search out occupations that match these personality types, kind of like a hand in the glove type of idea. Now, realistic, some of the common ways like conforming, humble, genuine, practical, hard-headed. Investigative, more like a researcher, analytical, independent, intellectual, introverted, rational, curious, and so on. Artistic is just like it says, very creative, imaginative, non-conforming, and so on. Social, probably a lot of people in this course are social. If I would do the test, the self-directed search, S would probably be your first code. So these are helpful people, kind, cooperative, sympathetic, friendly, and so on. Enterprising, these are like the business men and women, entrepreneurs. So they're ambitious, impulsive, self-confident, optimistic, adventurous, and so on. And conventional, this is like the bank teller. So conforming, persistent, obedient, practical, careful, orderly, and so on. So in the slides, I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see each work environment, starting with realistic, what they're looking for in these different work environments. Congruence is a key term. This really means the degree of fit between the person and that work environment. And what the theory basically states is that if you are in a congruent environment, then your vocational satisfaction and work satisfaction is going to be higher. Now, I took that one step further and tested, okay, if you are congruent, sorry about this, this is my if you are in a congruent work environment, what it says is that you will be more happy, have higher vocational satisfaction. I took it a step further and look at wages and earning capacity. Because I'm thinking if you are happy in your job and you're doing a good job, then theoretically you should be making more money. And that's what I'm testing longitudinally over 16 years now. Applying it, again, I use the self-directed search all the time. My vocational preference inventory and so on are available. Lent, Brown, Hackett, the social cognitive theory, that can be very useful. SCCT, go ahead and take a look at that. Szymanski and Hershenson. Now, these are two of my mentors at the University of Maryland. Really, Dr. David Hershenson was the person that brought me in, and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him. In fact, we developed a theory that will be outlined in Chapter 5 in the next chapter. And essentially what we're trying to look at is there's different interrelated constructs, meaning there's the individual, the mediating, the environment, the outcome, and so on. And how do all these different variables interplay and basically create the person that the client that we're evaluating is. And then by the next step of that, how are they doing vocationally or in the work field? So that is kind of chapter 4 in a nutshell. Now, make sure that you get the discussion question done by Sunday at midnight. And then on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you will post your informal feedback to the fellow students. And I will put up the video lecture for chapter 5 probably early, maybe like Monday or Tuesday, something like that. Now it's going to be one from last summer. So in the very beginning, I might talk about some housekeeping things that don't really correlate with exactly where we are in this course, but the content of chapter 5 has not changed. It's exactly the same. So we'll go through that. So the first minute or two, you might be like, wait a minute, we didn't meet on campus last week. The reason being is because last summer it was a hybrid model. We met one day on campus and we had one online lecture per week. Obviously, with COVID-19, that's not happening this summer. So we have 2 videos each week. So, and finally, I looked at the first DQs. Everyone did fine. We talked about some of the little housekeeping things from last week. Make sure that you have at least 1 citation per paragraph, roughly 2 pages for the DQs, about 4 solid paragraphs. Try to have a good conclusion at the end. And always, if you have a citation, you need a reference list. That's just basic APA 101. So I'm thinking if there's anything else we need to cover. I think that's it. So, I'm looking forward to reading the next discussion questions. I'll be grading them probably like Monday or Tuesday-ish. Remember to give your fellow students, at least do 2 of them a week. And then we'll go from there. And, I hope you're enjoying this course. We're going to make it the best we can given the circumstances we have. But I think once we get in past chapter 5, once we really start getting into like vocational assessment and the things that basically I do all the time, I'm getting ready to work on right now. This is a neuropsychological evaluation for, I think I mentioned this case where the lady was 22 years old. She's going to become a nurse. She had a really bad medical malpractice surgical outcome. And now, she's got really problems like in her testing. If you guys know percentiles, she was probably, above average, say like in the 80th percentile. Now her testing scores are like 1st percentile, 2nd percentile, 4th percentile. It's not a good situation. So we'll be talking about all that stuff next week. So have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.